greeting, introduction, explanation, begging for engagement, saying I'll start the video, a really long disclaimer about the video, and now we can rank 40 dubiously genred albums. Fall Out Boy's So Much for Stardust was possibly one of the highest profile scene releases this year. This album had me and everyone else desperately hoping for a return to form. And on this record, Fall Out Boy managed to step over the ankle-high bar of quality that they had set for themselves after releasing one mediocre album after another. Adding more guitar was a welcome addition, but everything still sounds so synthetic in a really bad way. Very disappointing. This year, the very prolific band Can't Swim released an album called Thanks But No Thanks. Obviously, their fourth full length had a lot to live up to for me. Sadly, I've liked each release a little less than the one before it, and unfortunately, Thanks But No Thanks does not buck this trend. Aside from tracks like Me versus All Y'all, and I Heard They Found You Face Down in the Living Room, with each song I found myself waiting for huge moments that never came. Let me get down here for a second. There's a mistake in there. You probably can't see. Hold on. You see this right here? That's the result of me thinking I liked this record. I don't know why I bother with the front bottoms anymore. I listened to this new album once. I liked the title a lot. I thought I loved this record, but with each listen, it got a little more annoying. And by now, if I put this thing on, I find myself skipping like every song. I like the song Batman for how bizarre it is and how it incorporates the title of the record into it. And I like the hook on Paris a lot, honestly. But the rest of this album, despite having a couple of interesting and wacky lyrical ideas, don't sit well simply because of the production choices and the vocal effects that they add. And then I went back through the Front Bottom's early catalog and was very confused. Did I ever like this band? I'm honestly not sure anymore. I'm gonna put this back, but I think it's gonna be traded in at Zia soon. All right, let's set this back up and talk about Origami Angel. So you know when everyone tells you you're supposed to like a band or an album, and you just can't get into it? That's this album for me. But this third full length is just a quick jaunt. It's mostly upbeat, amplified by the album's title, the art, and the ukulele sprinkled in through this album's runtime, which is only 22 minutes, by the way. And in true pop punk and emo fashion, it's a happy sounding record that isn't so happy when you dig into the lyrics. You look at everything that this album is telling you before you listen to it, you're like, oh, it's the brightest days, there's a ukulele, this is a goofy little music video. You eventually come to the realization that it's not quite so simple when the album tells you that the brightest days are few and far between. It doesn't hit as hard as I would like it to, and I never found myself coming back to this album. Speaking of albums that I'll probably never come back to, Taking Back Sundays, 152. It started out strong. It really did, but it fizzled out in a big way. Maybe it's because I don't have a deep-rooted nostalgia for this band that so many fans of this album do. Maybe it's because putting the number 152 as an Easter egg for fans doesn't get me excited. But this album didn't grab me or make me perk up even once. It's pleasant enough to listen to. It's inoffensive. It's something that I'd put on while my parents are visiting. I really couldn't get the message out of this album even after reading interviews with the band. It's almost like this album was just about putting out an album. I don't like talking bad about records, especially when they're by bands that I love, but luckily everything else on this list I'm at least excited to talk about, starting with Wilmette. Wilmette has been on my radar for a while, even if it's just in the periphery. But I was very surprised to learn that Hyper Focus was the band's debut album. If you're a fan of the poppy side of pop punk, you'll be hard-pressed to find anyone who's doing it as competently as Wilmette is. It feels heavily produced to do every pop punk convention very well, complete with an epic closer that's a crescendo to a mic drop. There's a lot of really fun songs, as you're gonna find on a pop punk record, but Circa 99 is the standout for me. And even though I like this record, Wilmette does kind of blend in with the wave of bands that sound a lot like this, like Chief State, Between You and Me, Bearings. I'm desperate for one of them to release something that's as good as Life's Not Out to Get You, just to reignite the genre again, you know? But even if this album isn't that, I'm glad that it exists, and I'm glad that bands like Well Met are at least keeping the blood flowing in this genre. So for this band, Well Met, I'm going to keep them on my radar, and I'm going to keep coming back to this album, even if I think that the songs are going to sound a lot better in a live setting. And then we get to one that I know people are going to expect to be higher. Bearing's third full-length album. It's completely trimmed of any fat, it's full of memorable hooks and catchy melodies. It's crisp, it's clean, it's fresh, what's not to love about it? But this is another one of those albums that's full of live show anthems, ones that are designed to get you moving, get you off your feet. But don't get me wrong, the studio versions of these songs are great, especially How You're a Freak, Go Long, and Live Forever Never Die, which are choruses that are going to stick in your head the first time you hear them, I guarantee it. I did get a little worried about this album when I heard the single Scenery. The chorus of that drives me nuts. So why is it so low on this list? Sometimes this album feels like, we're Bearings and you're watching Disney Channel. I still love Bearings though, just so you know. Old Neon's new record, Can't Fucking Wait, is 50 minutes and 15 songs of pretty straightforward jams. Everything about this record seems centered around being fun to play, fun to listen to, feel-good pop-punk music. Even the standout track Eulogies sounds uplifting despite having some of the darkest lyrics on this album. The obvious criticism is the album's length, and yeah, this feels a bit like a pop-punk marathon, but if you've been training for this for years like I have, it's gonna fly by and you're gonna love every second of it. Even though it's this low on the list, Old Neon did manage to make one of my favorite poppy pop-punk records of the year, and if they make it out to the West Coast, I'll be sure to see them live. So this is my first Sam I Am record, but it's their 9th one. It's a pretty mature record, one of the most mature on this list. You're not going to find any calls to arms or angst on Stowaway. The first track is pretty punk rock with the quick tempo and drums, but it's not an accurate representation of what Stowaway has to offer, because after that the album kind of settles into some mundane and laid-back musings about persistence through life despite wrong turns, about being stuck with someone you love, but in a beautiful way. Still, I really enjoyed this album, and in 2024 I'm going to make sure to make my way through all of Sam I Am's discography, and I'm excited what they have in store for me. Up next, we have the new album from Palette Knife. New Game Plus is an apt name for an LP, especially when it completely eclipses your debut album. And that's exactly what Palette Knife did when they released this album back in January. I've kept coming back to it. I think this is a really special album. This album is loosely based around the concept of video games. Apparently it goes even deeper than the obvious nods like some of the track titles and interludes. Each song is a boss battle or something that doesn't completely land, not because the songs are bad, I just don't get it. I just don't get it. New Game Plus is sure to delight any fans of this new generation of emo. You'll probably know within a minute if you're gonna like this album or not, with its What Is My Life Now subject matter and high energy instrumentation. And when listening to this album, it's impossible not to think of Upside's era Wonder Years, not just because of the I'm Not Sad Anymore lyricism, but because of the honesty and silliness behind some of the lyrics on this record. I am curious if they'll go the Wonder Years route and make a very serious record after this one sometime. I'd love to hear that. What we've gotten in New Game Plus from Palette Knife has stuck with me this year, especially songs like Letters from Momtown and That's a Rock Fact. I hope no one can accuse me of not being a fan of Blink-182 before all the Blinkies get up in arms about this not being number one. I want you to remember that I love this album. Can we still be friends, even if I rank it this low? The new Blink-182 album, One More Time, is about 10 times better than I was expecting. I kind of alluded in a video I made before this album came out that I expected it to suck, and totally foot and mouth on that one. It's pretty darn good. What I'm most excited to say about this record is that I'm glad it came out. Anthem Part 3 and Turpentine are some of my favorite Blink-182 songs in a very, very long time, but they are knocked down way too many notches because of the vocal effects on this song. The vocals sound so weird. It's especially disappointing on those tracks because of how much I love those songs otherwise, but it really holds true for the entire album. There's a lot of really good riffs, there's a lot of fun choruses, there's a lot of classic Blink buried somewhere in here. My opinion is generally positive about it. I'm jamming out to it. I think it's a fun record, and I'm interested to see how the discourse around this album shakes out. Like when Neighborhoods is really poorly received, and now a lot of people say that it's their favorite Blink-182 record. I'm just content having a Blink-182 record that's pretty good and not embarrassing. So the Menzingers have been churning out important albums to me for years and years. I love this band, and each album is special to me in its own way. If you want to hear me talk more about those albums, I did a video a few months ago that you should definitely check out. But now we're going to talk about their latest release, Some of It Was True. I wonder if while making this record they came up with the chorus for Try and knew that people of a simpler mind, like me, would jump on it and eat it right up. That song has all of the trappings of a Menzinger classic, and old fans are sure to grab onto this song. Some of It Was True wasn't an easy album for me to love. It doesn't have the obvious timelessness of On the Impossible Past, or the instant classic energy that After the Party does either, but it's still a solid entry in the Menzingers' already impressive discography. Tom and Greg sound great as always, and these songs are dripping with heart and honesty as usual. This is one of those records that fans are going to be vocally disappointed by just because their expectations for the Menzingers are so unrealistically high. But if you wrote this album off when you first heard it, I encourage you to give it another chance, especially the song Ultraviolet and Try. Fiddlehead's newest album was a tough listen for me. It's only this high up because I go through phases where I crave this kind of slow, brooding, and noisy rock. Death Is Nothing to Us is a good album, I know it is, but I'm not 100% clicking with it yet. The vocals in particular make me very anxious and stressed, to a point where I wish there were moments where there just weren't any, or they were a little quieter. The moments that I love in this album are the first half of the song Fiddleheads, where Sean Costa's drumming is center stage over some guitar, and when the vocals do kick in, they blend in instead of overpowering it. Fiddlehead will often get stuck on a verse and repeat it to really drive the point home. They do this a bunch of times, and luckily it's on their most poignant lyrics, which are constantly poetic throughout the record. Ooh, we got another one. Okay, another one. Knuckle Puck's new album, Losing What We Love. In October, Knuckle Puck released their fourth full-length album, which is also their first on Pure Noise Records, which I thought was kind of cool. I was heavily anticipating this record, and I do think it's the best one since Copacetic. But there's something about this album that doesn't work for me, and I'll try and explain what I mean here. There seems to be a disconnect between the lyrical content and the performances. The Tower hits the mark, but a song like You and I has very angry lyrics and a very soft, summery performance from the vocalists. He says, "You've got me all mad for switching up your argument like that." But he sounds happy about it, and everything in this song, including the lyric video, screams summertime jam. I'm just some knucklehead, but my favorite Knuckle Puck songs are the ones that have a lot of grit and anger behind them. That's why they're so good live. They have so much aggression and energy in these songs. I loved hearing them in person. Despite all that negativity, I still really enjoyed this album. I think it's worth your time, especially if you're a Knuckle Puck fan like I am. Excuse me. On that note, let's move on. Gotta change up the view a little bit. This year, a formerly beloved pop punk band turned indie rock turned pop rock band finally released a new album. That's enough of that. Out of all of the legacy bands that were releasing new music this year, this was the one that I felt most confident was going to be solid. This Is Why is another gem in Paramore's near flawless career, even though it doesn't live up to the self-titled record from a few years ago, in my opinion. The title track's chorus has been stuck in my head all year, and I don't care if it's been played to death. I think this is a wonderful pop song. Even if there wasn't anything lyrically to connect with, Hayley Williams' performance and vocals are completely on point throughout this entire album. It's hard not to get engaged and engrossed in these songs that she's singing. And at this point, it's so clear that Paramore has outgrown this genre. I mean, she's come a long way since featuring on that one Set Your Goals song that's totally a guilty pleasure of mine. And with that, we now move on to the list of albums that I really enjoyed and kept coming back to over and over again throughout the year, starting with Military Gun's debut, Life Under the Gun. So if you're partial to pop punk like I am, Military Gun's new album might convince you that you don't hate hardcore after all. Do you want to join us? Oh, just a sweet bug. Military Gun comment on the boring dystopia that they find themselves living in with slower tempos, shouted hooks, and beats that I couldn't help but bob my head along to. I don't really pay attention to the discourse in the hardcore genre, so I don't know what happens when a band releases something like this that has a lot of melodic elements and accessibility, and then is attributed to your precious genre. And I'm sure there are people who are bemoaning the mainstream rise of melodic hardcore and are gonna have an aneurysm when they see a guy like me putting this album on a list with the front bottoms. But way higher, so calm down. Look, I'm just projecting. This album had the right amount of grit for me to really love it, the right amount of accessibility for me to keep listening to it, and I'm glad I listened to this album a lot because now I'm prepared for the upcoming tour that they're doing with Pool Kids supporting, which I'm super excited for. Next up, the long-awaited follow-up to the Wicked Bears debut album, Tuning Out. I totally knew about the Wicked Bears before someone commented that I should check them out. I mean, how could you not know about the Wicked Bears? In all honesty, I'm super glad that someone brought this record to my attention because I totally would have missed it. And the Wicked Bears are playing some 1-2-3 ABC punk rock that's nothing short of charming. There's just a magic that happens when you pair a silly or absurdist lyric with a nice little earworm of a melody. And when first listening to this album, I wondered if the charm would ever wear off and there would be a point where this album became cumbersome. But with songs this short, you just don't have time to dwell on some of the tracks that don't completely work. Wicked Bears let you know that they're in on the joke and they're aware of the genre cliches, but this isn't a parody album, and it doesn't come with that self-awareness that borders on cynical. The highlight of Underwater is its sly lyricism and storytelling that paints often hilarious pictures in my head, like in Lucky or Max. Max admittedly has a terrible chorus, but look at the verses before it. I just can't get enough of it. On the surface, Wicked Bears are a silly band making silly songs, but I honestly think that there's a lot more under the surface and a lot of room to take this band seriously, even if Wicked Bears doesn't actually want you to. Equipment came onto my radar when I first heard the excellent single Lofo, which will make you have second thoughts about giving your opinion about anything online. I'm partial to the more emotionally charged tracks like Hot Young Doctors and Lofo, that energy coming mostly from some fun guitar work from Nick, and it did take me a few listens to fall in love with this record. It's got some of that oddly specific and mundane lyricism that's become almost a meme in emo at this point, but it's paired with a very subtle performance that makes the times when Nick does emote heavily really stand out, like in the song Username. This band isn't super popular, but you should definitely give them a listen. Their album was self-released and it's on Bandcamp for $7, and it's well worth that price tag if you want to support the band. Okay, so this is like my most highly anticipated album of the year. I get it. Just gotta sort through all my first pressings of Youth Fountain's albums. Alright. We have Together and Lonesome, the third Youth Fountain full-length, the second one that's solo with Tyler. Together and Lonesome is still that depressing, self-deprecating, emo pop-punk shit that we love Youth Fountain for. But this time around, Tyler sounds better and cleaner than ever, which is probably credited to the producer that he worked with. There are some really great tracks on here like Haiku and Roses in My Backpack and Requiem that stand out as the strongest songs on this album. And what I want more than anything is for Youth Fountain to blow up, but I don't think that this is the record that's gonna do it. And from some of the interviews I've watched, even he doesn't seem too stoked on this record, which is surprising to me. Tyler appears to be in a much better headspace than he used to be, and that is genuinely a really good thing to hear. Hopefully we get a fourth album from Youth Fountain, and I just hope on that record that Tyler finds something to be very passionate about, instead of just writing what he thinks that we all want to hear. Tyler, if you're watching this for some reason, know that I absolutely love Youth Fountain. For now, I really like this album. I know a lot of people have this record as their #1 album of the year, and when LP4 comes around, I will be ordering it day one. And while we're down here, let's talk about Kerosene Heights. They've got a really interesting medley of sounds, which I really love about this band. The goofy emo guitar riffs, the gang vocals, and the post-hardcore influenced lead vocals singing pop-punk lyrics may sound bad on paper, but I do think it works well on Kerosene Heights' debut, Southeast of Somewhere, especially on Perfect Timing and the album's standout for me, Salty Eyes. There's an unexpected instrument on the closing track, Next to Nowhere, which completes the album's disintegration into a beautiful mess of feedback, melody, and static. This closing track ends the album on very strong footing, and as Spotify loops into the unpleasant feedback of the opening track, I'm more than happy to listen to an encore of the equally strong opener, Salty Eyes. Even if I'm not in love with the entire track list, I have fallen in love with Kerosene Heights and their beautiful fusion of some of my favorite genres. Be sure to check out Southeast of Somewhere. For y'all, it's just the next album, but for me, it's the following weekend. There's so many albums to get through. Couldn't do it in one weekend. This next album was a very big surprise for me. I haven't liked this band really since high school. It's Have Mercy, and this is their newest album called Numb. This band has been through the ringer, and I feel for them on that front, and you can tell that on Numb, they're in a much better place and they're much more reflective, but in a positive way this time around. Even so, it's still a melancholic and sad sounding record. So Brian doesn't really swing for the fences with shouts and screams like he would on his very early work, and with very few exceptions, Numb is a very low energy record. There are times when his vocals sound so good that I wish I could hear them a little bit better on this album. But for me, Numb hits all of the right beats and is bubbling over with beautiful instrumentals and a really nice atmosphere. It's 100% worth the listen. It's been a long time since we got a proper Waster release, but they're once again proving that they are the masters of pop punk melt in your mouth bliss. I've been a Waster believer since Screwed, and at this point I think I even prefer them to Neck Deep. They don't have any misses yet. I actually love Identity Crisis, and even their covers of Give Yourself a Try and Give You Hell have gotten heavy rotation from me. Their newest album, Till the Wheels Fall Off, released without really any fanfare at all. Waster is one of those bands caught up in whatever was going on Hopeless Records, where they wanted all these pop punk bands and then all of a sudden there were none, and they only managed to release Identity Crisis on that label. And with that release, I remember seeing some pretty high production music videos for their singles, but it seems that the marketing budget for Till the Wheels Fall Off is $0. So screw that. Here's some free marketing for them. Do you miss when Neck Deep wasn't so high concept? Do you miss when Travis Barker wasn't also producing Blink-182? Waster's newest album might be exactly what you're looking for. I think every song on this record hits the mark for being a ton of fun, catchy, pop punk jams, especially 3 Days Sober and Casa Armor. Creeper aren't strangers to the concept album, and they released yet another this year. This time it's about vampires. Complete with demonic voices, religious references, and delightfully over-the-top album artwork, Creeper's third full-length delivers on their premise in every way. It may lack some of the sing-along songs that their previous records had, although Lovers Led Astray comes pretty close. But this album doubles down on the theatricality and the camp that I've always loved Creeper for, without resorting to those awkward spoken word interludes that we had on their last album. And I appreciate that in Sangavore they are not hiding the concept behind a thick layer of metaphor. It's very clearly about vampires. I mean, look at some of these lyrics. No reflection in the mirror, no light behind your eyes. And there's plenty of story to get into on this album, told delightfully by Will Gould's exceptional performance. I love how dramatic it is. I love how the guitars come front and center once in a while and get their own little chorus in a way. I love how the themes of love and heartbreak and death are explored through a story of vampires. It is almost certainly one of my favorite records of the year. Alright, let's let bugs sleep and let's go talk about some albums that were almost in my top 10. This next band brings me back to high school, when YouTube seemed to be recommending and advertising their lead single over and over and over again. Up until their last album, I haven't really been a big fan. They've just been the coffee talk band, so perfect time to have a little coffee. Add some ice to it. Winters in Arizona still need iced coffee. All right, let's talk about Hotel Blue by Broadside. So fun fact, one of the reasons I started this channel is to talk about Broadside's album The Raging Sea, an album that I loved and saw nobody else mentioning, and I thought it deserved to be celebrated. The Raging Sea was a very dark album, and I liked that direction for Broadside. Made me very excited where they would go from here, but they went to a very poppy sound with Hotel Blue, and I have to say, I still really love it. Hotel Blue is about a group of people who are living different lives in different hotel rooms, but if I hadn't heard the band say that there was that through line in this album, I would have had no idea that it even existed. Luckily, Hotel Blue doesn't use its concept as a crutch, it's just an extra little thing for keen listeners. I'm sure that it helped give the band a compass of sorts when crafting this album, but I was apprehensive in the first 30 seconds because it immediately sounds brighter and poppier than The Raging Sea, but once the chorus hits, Ollie reminds me why I love Broadside so much now. The one hiccup for me is Dazed and Confused, although I like whatever instrument goes solo at the end. I think that sounds awesome. The rest of the album alternates between great and amazing, with the highlights being Cruel, which is possibly their best song ever, How to Love, How to Lie, and Blue. It's so great to see Broadside shining bright again now that they've left Victory Records behind, and I'd love to see them do a US headline tour next year. If you don't know, this band rules live. I saw them headline on their Raging Sea tour. Blew me away. Oh. So I'm a bit of a Citizen hipster. Life in Your Glass World is my favorite album by Citizen, and if I had done a list in 2021 of my favorite albums, it would have been very close to the top. It was so different than everything that they had done in all of the right ways, and I was really pleased to see that it was being well received. Although I love Youth and As You Please, those albums hit me the same way that the new Fiddlehead release does, or old Basement Records do, and with their newest record I would have been happy with Glass World 2.0, but that's just not Citizen's style. They're going to try and do something different every time. And that's why you have Citizen fans who lean hardcore, Citizen fans who lean more punk, who are more alternative, who are more pop, who are more pop punk. There's so many different kinds of Citizen fans, and admittedly, Calling the Dogs is a lot less fun than Life in Your Glass World, and I don't like it quite as much as Life in Your Glass World either. But if you look at the placement of this album on this list, obviously I still really like it. The biggest swing that Citizen takes on this album is with the song Options, which has a sound that feels very new to the band and is the time where their ambition on the record hits me the hardest emotionally. I would have loved the instrumentals at the end to keep on going for another minute before a smooth transition into Takes One to Know One, a groovy little track that makes the album do something weird in this genre and closes on an upbeat tone. Citizen is a band that thrives off energy at live shows. Their core fans are ones who pop off at the biggest moments in the set, so this album feels like it was specifically engineered in a lab to be fun to play live and to be fun to hear live. Dogs, Bad Company, When I Let You Down, and Hypertrophy will keep the energy up the whole time. I love the path that Citizen is on right now. They feel like a new band with each release. I hope Citizen is enjoying this high. Can't wait to see them live. Can't wait to hear what they do next. Heart Attack Man is a strange band. Their third full-length was independently released in May, and this feels like their most important work to date. It's one that I really wanted to be in my top spot before I listened to it, but it doesn't quite make it. Don't get me wrong, I still love this release, and it's my favorite release by them so far. Eric's vocals sound better than ever, and this release sees the entire band being pulled in a bunch of different directions. The record opens with birds chirping and the slow and plodding track Practiced in the Mirror. It's like they're placing you in a serene little world. And if you're like me, you won't notice until months later that the dogs barking in the opening track are part of the song and not my neighbor's dogs. Then of course we get a face full of classic Heart Attack Man with the title track Freak of Nature, the best song that Heart Attack Man have ever written. Heart Attack Man embraced the weird on this record, and they take some risks that would have been a prime opportunity to play it safe and pander to a wider audience. The biting sarcasm is there, the guitar hooks are there, the scratch your head songs are there. I desperately want Heart Attack Man to gain more and more popularity. They're one of my favorite live acts right now. They put out this great release, so if you haven't checked out Heart Attack Man's Freak of Nature, please give it a listen. So in September, Long Island hardcore band Koyo released their long-awaited debut album. It's called Would You Miss It? I've been listening to it almost non-stop since then, and if I could use two words to describe it, it'd be accessible aggression. And since Koyo is a group of Long Island hardcore kids playing in a pop-punk band, I think that adds up. These songs are meant for finger-pointing, for catharsis, for trying to deal with the feeling that you've been wronged. There's 11 songs on here, and any one of them could have been singles. That's to say there's not a single weak track on the record. From the opener that feels like a thesis statement with the chorus, How'd It Get So Bad, to the closing track, I was constantly impressed with how exciting each song is. Whether it's the emotional outro of 51st State, the pacing shakeup in the bridge of You're on the List, the vocal forward and shouty verses in Life's Uphill, and we can go on and on and on. Would You Miss It remains fresh and exciting throughout its entire runtime. The melodies throughout an entire song and over the course of this entire record aren't just constrained to a chorus. They're addicting and in your face in the verses, in the bridges, in the outros, everywhere. With the release of Would You Miss It, which I know a lot of people have deep in their top 10 lists, I think Koyo is poised to blow up in 2024, or at the very least blow up with their sophomore record, assuming it's as good as this one is. So the decidedly not pop-punk band Hot Milk released their debut album this year. It's called Call to the Void, and it's fantastic. It's got one of my favorite opening tracks of the year on it. I think it's so important that an opening track gets you invested in the rest of the album, and Welcome to the gets me excited to hear it. The following two tracks don't quite live up to the opener, but it picks back up with the electric Party on My Deathbed. The production is dense and loud. It's probably not everyone's cup of tea, and usually it's not even my cup of tea, but I think in this case it's the rare instance where this kind of production really elevates the record. Like, these tracks might work okay acoustic, but the extra vocal layerings and effects and synths really work to keep me interested. It actually saves the song Zoned Out from being put in the forgettable category for me. I think I put a lot of weight on lyrics in albums, and at first I didn't think that this record had much to offer me, but I kept getting drawn back to this album, and I ended up finding real depth and meaning in these lyrics. It almost presents itself as a party pop record, but there's a lot more to it than that. You can sense the amount of care and heart that Hot Milk put into their debut record. The Void ends this album as an inescapable fate, a fate that is sometimes described in these songs as tantalizing. Do you want to join the void early? Will you have to before you're ready? Or will you join while you're still alive? This album to me is about finding your reasons to live. Funny story here, I was listening to this album one day and my wife walked in and heard it for the first time, and she was like, I don't like this. It just continued my trend of showing my wife music that she doesn't like. And now, guess what, Bug? It's time for the top 10. Starting with Lover's Lane by Thanks I Hate It. There's some albums where it's impossible to pick your favorites. On Thanks I Hate It's debut album, it's hard because I connect with every song on here. I find it especially impressive that such a tiny release sounds this good. Look no further than the opening track, which seems to be a pitch to the listener to show them everything that this band has to offer. And what they have to offer is emotional vocals from Sam Hogan, non-stop riffing from Ryan and William on guitars, and an energetic punch from Ryan on drums. Emo gets clowned on for a lot of things, but Thanks I Hate It avoids some of the pitfalls that prevent me from liking the usual suspects in this genre. Like how the lyrics on Lover's Lane feel very personal and honest without ever falling in the bizarre territory. Anyways, I unironically enjoy this sound coming out of a lot of new emo bands, and it's nice that I can take this album seriously and not be distracted by jokes and purposeful cringe. The jokes on Lover's Lane are reserved for the song titles, but the songs themselves contain heaps of meaning about heartbreak and struggle. There's some albums that I listened to this year that sound a lot like this one, but Lover's Lane stands out because it has so many wow moments. And if I start listing the standout songs, I'd end up just reciting the track list. Please go check out Lover's Lane by Thanks I Hate It when you get a chance. And at number 9, we have the prophesized return of the best band in the world, Fireworks. Higher Lonely Power was the first album that I listened to this year, and it's been a mainstay thanks to some excellent tracks like Veins in David's Hand, Blood in the Milk, and Woods 2. Many of these songs have grown on me over time, and I definitely didn't give it the credit it deserved when it first came out. Luckily, I had the entire year to marinate on this album. I talk about Fireworks and this album at length, track by track, if you want to check out that other video on my channel. I don't know if the fact that it took a long time to come out helped or hurt it, just as far as expectations go. Of course, I had really high expectations for this record, but it's nice when an album that's been stewing for this long feels like it had a ton of effort and care put into it. It sounds like they took their time making it and are very passionate about it. Fireworks forever. Once in a while, I wonder if digging through the trenches of unknown pop punk is gonna be worth it. The genre's dead, right? If you were a good band, why would you be playing anything that sounds like this? And while the next album on this list didn't sound like it's gonna revive the genre, I'm very glad I found it. And that album is Spill by Dad Hats. Full disclosure, this album was recommended by a subscriber, so thank you. There's an obvious comparison you can make between Dad Hats and other bigger bands like the Wonder Years or Fall Out Boy or even City Mouth. And I hope that doesn't imply that Dad Hats aren't doing their own thing. It's just to implore you or even beg you to go check out Dad Hat's new album, Spill. What I love most about this record is that it just goes for it. Dad Hats uses every trick in the book to get you emotionally invested in some larger-than-life choruses, vocal melodies, and lyrics that are just begging to be put on a t-shirt or a tattoo. Scattered about the record is piano, synth, a closing acoustic track, as is customary, some silly emo lyrics, but what is noticeably missing is the stupid shit that's plaguing so many albums that are afraid to take themselves seriously, like botched recordings, silly voicemails, and burps. I'm just happy to see an album doing all of the things that I love about this genre without the wink, like, oh, we know we suck kind of undertones. Every single song has a swing for the fences chorus that completely works in my opinion, but I especially want to shout out I'm Pavlov's Dog, Y'all, which might be my favorite track of the entire year. Coming in at number 7, of course this is going to be on here, Free Throw's new album, The Lessons That We Swear to Keep. This band is a gift to the genre, and I think their 4th album might be their best one yet. It's an album that acknowledges a struggle that resonates very deeply with me, and that's battling the same demons over and over again, and the boring realization that most of your life is spent between highs and lows. This is absolutely one of my favorite releases of the year. If you want to hear me talk more about it, I have a video about this album and Free Throw on my channel. At number 6 is an undisputably amazing record, and that's Jeff Rosenstock's Hell Mode. It's so clearly and unabashedly influenced by the Wicked Bears. Not really, but if you like Jeff Rosenstock, you should listen to Wicked Bears. Anyways, for an album titled Hell Mode, it doesn't go as haywire as I was quite expecting, which maybe is a detractor for me because my favorite moments are the times where it's just chaos. This album is just what happens when you take a pretty simple genre and go the extra mile with it. I think about a song like The Future Is Dumb, which could have ended at 2:52, but goes on for an extra minute to slam you in the face with what I'm sure is going to be an absolutely electric song to hear live. Those first 5 tracks are an absolute thrill ride, and even if the album slows down a bit from there, I'm still on board with Jeff trying to work out his place in the world and its hard truths. I don't think Hell Mode is even in my top 3 of favorite Rosenstock albums, but it's still the cream of the crop in this scene, and I hope I don't offend anyone by having it on a pop punk and emo list. It's gotta be hard trying to come up with a new album after you've released what's probably gonna be your career's defining work. My 5th favorite album of the year attempts to top Spanish Love Song's magnum opus, Brave Faces Everyone. I hope that Brave Faces Everyone doesn't end up being Spanish Love Song's defining work, because that would mean that they never followed it up with anything as good or better than it. The writing of No Joy found Spanish Love Songs in a weird spot. They had more eyes on them than ever, higher expectations than ever. They were facing down a challenge where a lesser band would have faltered and released a worse version of the same album. If you've been following them on Patreon, they've been consistently releasing covers of great songs. Those covers have been awesome and welcome for fans of the band, but it must have also informed the band's direction on their 4th LP. How could they put out a Spanish Love Songs twist on the song Smile Like You Mean It? What did Jimmy Eat World do that Spanish Love Songs could incorporate into their own music? The frontman Dylan has mentioned he was messing around with some ambient music during quarantine, and he clearly brought that into No Joy. The result is a very fresh sound for the band, and it's not a gimmick. Tracks like Mutable would have been beautiful on their own, but the synth gives it this haunting feeling and an atmosphere that you can just get lost in. No Joy is at times haunting and psychedelic, and it's also got a noticeable shift in tone from Brave Faces Everyone. No Joy is still sad and hopeless, but it's not angry. Spanish Love Songs front-loads the singles with the poppier songs and their best choruses that will please the most amount of people onto Side A. Side B is a slightly more challenging batch of songs that is propped up by some excellent lyricism. And I love how these songs begin with a specific event or story that sets up a larger and broader idea. The final track really pulls everything together, and it gives us that cathartic release that Side B seemed to be building to the whole time. His vocals start off soft and slow, but the pressure and energy build with each verse in what ends up being my favorite song on the album. Each line here teeters between being cynical, hilarious, or depressing. My personal interpretation is that they are being sincere with this track, but I find myself wondering if Spanish Love Songs is trying their hand at satire and are just gonna laugh at me for not getting it. And maybe if I wore a red flannel and read these lyrics in a mocking tone, I could convince you that they're actually bad. But I do know that No Joy got overlooked because it's not Brave Faces Everyone. For me, this is a borderline perfect album. Another essential listen in Spanish Love Songs' perfect discography so far. I also want to mention and shout out Spanish Love Songs' progression in the live scene. The first time I saw them play was pre-pandemic with the Wonder Years, and I was like, I don't know about these guys live. But I just saw them in the support slot for the Hot Mulligan tour this fall. They sounded excellent and were pretty high energy for a band that sings total bummers of songs. So don't miss them if they come through your city. One thing I love about the Dirty Nil is how huge and epic their songs sound. On their 5th record, Free Rein to Passions, they're as big and as loud as ever. It opens confidently with one of their heaviest cuts to date, Celebration. Vocalist Luke Bentham savors every note in the slow chorus of this song. I want to make sure I mention Sam Tomlinson on bass, who gives some of the best backing vocal performances of the entire year. The range on this guy is incredible.
Bass?
And even though this opening track, Celebration, isn't my favorite song on the album, I do think I can say that it's the trio at their absolute best. On Celebration, the 3 members play so gracefully with and against each other before finally coming together in one last explosion of the chorus around the final minute of the song. It's a truly lovely opener, worthy of the title Celebration, but I actually had a very lukewarm first impression of Free Rein to Passion. I listened to it on a medium-ish volume in the car and found Luke's vocals to be alarmingly close to nails on a chalkboard. It wasn't until I revisited this album on a pair of headphones cranked way up that I finally got it. I needed the riffs and vocals to be so loud and disorienting that I couldn't focus on anything except the song being played. Luke's vocals are so loud and commanding on this album and dripping with personality. I swear that I can hear him smiling on every single song. And I don't know if that's going to work for everybody, because there are times when it sounds like Luke is trying to break a glass using just the vibrations of his voice. That's to say, he walks a very fine line between unpleasant screeching and powerful singing, although for me he always falls on the latter. The theatricality that the Dirty Nil can bring to rock and roll is on full display on the song The Light, the Void, and Everything. It's a song that I love so much and leaves such an impression that I constantly think it's the name of the album. There's so many great lines in here, but these words are only as good as the song behind them. So while I'm reading these, keep in mind that I think they sound a lot better in context. There's the rally cry of Free Rein to Passion in Free Rein to Passions. The sneered challenge of Mad at Your Chains, Not Enough to Break Them in Land of Clover. And of course, the repetition and screams of What the Hell Happened in Undefeated. You know, I'm looking at the lyrics and just reading them, I can hear every verse in my head and the sounds around it. For me, that's just a sign that I really connected with this album. If you missed it, I hope that you will check out the Dirty Nil's Free Rein to Passions. You might know who the next 3 are on this list, but you probably don't know the order. Number 3 is Sincere Engineer's release, Cheap Grills. Chicago is no stranger to great pop punk and punk acts, but on Cheap Grills, Sincere Engineer make a push for the top of the list. Despite coming from a massive, in this scene anyway, label, Cheap Grills never sounds overblown or inauthentic or studio mandated. It's an album that looks backwards in every way that you possibly can, with nostalgia, with regret, with anger, but instead of feeling grandiose, it feels grounded. It feels like riding a scooter in a cul-de-sac. And I don't say that just because of the production on this record, although the rough around the edges vocals and simple guitar tones do add to it. The themes in this album are expressed with like a delicious wit that genuinely made me laugh a couple of times when I first heard it. Verses about fire, burning, hell, and the sun keep the coals of Cheap Grills warm, or maybe it's the clever way to frame your memories turning to ash while your life goes up in smoke. I like how the songs are tied together lyrically, like how the opener in Anemia talks about meeting someone at a party and thinking that it probably went very poorly. But maybe it didn't, so on the next song they suggest moving in together. There's songs about collecting memories in your life, imprinting it with trinkets, making souvenirs that your kids might find covered in dust in your attic. And that's just side A. Side A is packed with the anthems, the singles, the middle finger pointing, I hate you kind of songs. A Hospital Scare ends side A and kicks the record into a much more introspective gear. Exhausted with Life, side B of Cheap Grills is about failure, unrealized potential, and the giant gray blob that life becomes as your dreams are narrowed down. What a bummer. But with emo-influenced music, what did you expect? But somehow these songs still remain as fun sing-alongs. It's maybe a silly example of how important music can be in getting people to empathize with situations they don't understand, but the closing track Blind Robin made me emotionally invested and understanding of how sentimental winning a baseball game could end up being. Like the imagery of leaving the TV on at home so your grandfather's ghost could watch a championship game that he never got to see his favorite team win. And here I am, my entire life spent thinking how silly it is to get romantic optimistic about sports. Cheap Grills was essential listening for me this year, and Sincere Engineer is one of the most exciting acts in the scene right now, and she ended up releasing one of my favorite records of 2023. Of course Hot Mulligan is top 2. Are you crazy? Hot Mulligan has reached the event horizon where they're so hyped that now people are like, oh, Hot Mulligan's overrated, or oh my god, they're the worst band ever. I disagree big time with those takes, and I think that Why Would I Watch is easily their best record. The vocals may be an acquired taste, but for me, they're absolutely perfect. I've got an entire video about this album, so check that out if you want to hear more. The short of it is that every track finds a new way to get you off your feet, all while having the biggest gap between how it sounds, it's a lot of fun, and what it means, it's a total bummer. And here we are at my favorite album of the year, by a solid margin. With the 4th album, the threat of it being their last album, from Australian rock band Trophy Eyes. I was definitely impressed with these singles, especially Blue Eyed Boy and What Hurts the Most, but I had no idea what was really in store for us with this album. When I pressed play on this album for the first time, it was on a crappy Bluetooth speaker. About halfway through the first song, I was like, what am I doing? Trophy Eyes deserves way better than this. So I saved listening to this album for a real speaker where I could sit down in front of it and fully focus on the entire album. Loud, fully engaged, and I know I'm supposed to say, oh, and I'm so glad I did, but honestly, I was gonna like this album no matter how I heard it. Sure, there's the cult classic Trophy Eyes rock and roll jams in the singles, and some aggressive cuts like Sydney and People Like You that might make you want to crank up the volume, but this album isn't constantly trying to wow us with epic swells into the chorus, or the biggest riffs you've ever heard. It's the serene and quiet moments in Supersize and Sunshine that make you melt. The vocal-only first pass of the chorus in Life in Slow Motion, the soft piano in Burden, the sweet soft sounds of Sweet Soft Sound. That lets you fall into this album and let it envelop you. And then it will wow you with an explosion of rock. Based on the prologue from the lyric booklet, this album is John. It's a view of life from his perspective, which he chooses to share with us because he's, I don't know, brave? I think the words in this record and the stories told in these songs are brave, and you can tell that Trophy Eyes have labored over every word in this album. I listened to it, and you can hear words that are painful to sing and must have been even more painful to write. John is showing us life in his shoes, and there are things that I would have never felt comfortable saying, whether the lines are true or not, and I don't think I could have ever mustered the strength or the creativity to write these words. Powerful and devastating lines are scattered throughout this record, and I don't want to put them on screen, not because they're offensive or something, but because I don't want to rob this album of its most intimate, personal, and honest moments. You should hear that from Trophy Eyes. The epilogue feels as if it's directly addressed to the fans. They even throw in a nod to their very first EP from nearly 10 years ago. If you love Trophy Eyes, if their music means the world to you, then they make you feel like you're appreciated as a fan. I hope it's not the last we hear from them. I hope they do a headliner through the States in 2024, and I hope that you check out this record ASAP. So that's it. A lot of albums came out this year. A lot of albums are gonna come out in 2024. I'll be talking about them. If you want to stick around on the channel, make sure that you subscribe. Thanks to all of you. This channel did get monetized, which is awesome considering how infrequently I'm able to post. But that's really exciting because in this pop punk niche, I know that there's tens of dollars to be made. Seriously though, I do appreciate anyone that's taken time to comment on my videos, recommend music. I found a lot of great albums, some of which made their way onto the top 10 this year. Thank you, I appreciate you, and I hope to see you in the next one.